Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, your guide from the dark side, Dawson Richard. I hope everybody's doing good. Scratch that. I hope everybody's doing great. I hope you're all doing well. Sorry that this took so long. This is a weird episode for me. It was weird to write. But before we start the episode, I'd like to talk about something. It's a wild world out there right now, and I don't normally like to present my personal thoughts and opinions on outside topics, but here recently, I just feel like this is something that needs to be said on this platform, and that's in regards to the protests over George Floyd's death. And I've been seeing a lot of stuff around that says, like Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. And I understand that the people who post this stuff aren't trying to go against Black Lives Matter and aren't trying to say that like Black lives don't matter. But police officers and everybody else have just as much worth as people of color because, everybody has worth. All people have value. All life has value. But when these things get posted, they're actively detracting from the Black Lives Matter movement. And what is going on in the country right now is fucked. And there's no disputing that. And if you don't want to protest, don't protest. But at least get some info out there, because I understand, like, protesting, you're putting yourself in harm's way, and especially with, the rubber bullets and the batons and the riot teams, like, it's definitely scary to get out there and to, like, put yourself in danger like that. People are losing their fucking eyesight just because they're going to peacefully protest. And so I understand if you don't want to protest, but do something. There's plenty of organizations to donate to. There's plenty of, causes that you can, support with vocally, or just sharing stuff online to help other people see the right way. But at least get some info out there and help people see the right way of thinking. And I understand that some of my viewers are going to be upset because they came to hear the podcast and not listen to me rant about politics and shit. But the thing is, this isn't a political problem. This is a human rights problem. Like, this is people are being brutalized problem. And so if this message of goodwill and hope has offended anyone, then I'm sorry that you feel that way and hope that you'll change your mind later on the matter. And if you just don't want to listen anymore, then, fuck it. If that's the kind of person you want to be, then I'm not really sure I'd want you listening to my podcast anyway. But with all that being said, I hope you guys are excited for today's episode because I've got a good one. And it took a hell of a lot of time to write. And so, yeah. Remember, as always, if you were squeamish around gore, murder, and other heinous acts of violence, please back out now.
Hello? Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip.
You have to trust me.
The Heaven's Gate cult.
You have to believe me.
The Heaven's Gate cult.
This is regarding what?
I can be your shepherd. You can follow us.
This is regarding a mass suicide.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today's episode is over one of the weirdest and most popular cults in America, the Heaven's Gate cult. For those of you who don't really know anything about this, get fucking ready because this shit is wild, okay? It's definitely odd, but it's interesting as all hell, and I remember this being one of my first big, deep dives into true crime and cult stuff. So a video on it popped up in my recommended when, little Dawson was first surfing the World Wide Web, and it sounded wild, so, I clicked on it and just kind of went down the rabbit hole, so to speak. I watched, 6 true crime documentaries that night. It was, good times. But anyway, enough stalling, enough bullshitting. Let's get right into today's story. So our story starts with a man by the name of Marshall Applewhite. Now, Marshall led an interesting little life, he did. He was born in Texas, Spur, Texas to be exact, which is an interesting name for a town. But anyway, he was born in Spur, Texas, and had 3 other siblings. His father was Marshall Herff Applewhite Sr. and was a Presbyterian minister. Now, this, of course, leads to little Applewhite Jr. becoming very religious as a child. So Applewhite attended Corpus Christi High School and Austin College, and while he was in Austin College, he was active in several student organizations and earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy in 1952, and subsequently enrolled at Union Presbyterian Seminary to study theology, hoping to become a minister one day, just like his dad. So he marries Anne Pierce, and around that time they had, 2 children, Mark and Lane. Now, early in his seminary studies, he decided to leave the school to pursue a career in music, becoming the music director of a Presbyterian church in North Carolina. He was a baritone singer, and he enjoyed spirituals and the music of Handel, so look at that. In 1954, he was drafted by the United States Army, and he served in Austria and New Mexico as a member of the Army Signal Corps. He left the military in 1956 and enrolled at the University of Colorado, where he earned a master's degree in music and focused on musical theater. So far, Mr. Applewhite sounds like an upstanding guy, He sounds like a good guy, he's getting his education, he's doing his college, he was in the military, he's got a wife and 2 kids. He sounds like an upstanding guy, right? Well, get fucking ready. Because Applewhite moved to New York City in an unsuccessful attempt to launch a professional singing career upon finishing his education in Colorado. He then taught at the University of Alabama. So while he's at the University of Alabama, old boy Applewhite started to experiment around, right? So he started having a same-sex relationship with a male student, right? So, of course, this was looked down upon by his religious education, and he lost his position. So while this is going on, Applewhite, being a man of God, he loves God, so he's very extremely frustrated with himself because he's, all this sexual guy-on-guy action's really starting to get to his head, which just fucking cracks me up because I can only think of the line in the Book of Mormon, which is a fucking hilarious musical, and you should listen to it. Honestly, even if you're not a big musical person, it's fucking hilarious. It's made by the people who did South Park. But anyway, off topic. There's a part where they're talking about having gay thoughts as a Mormon, and they're suppressing these very obvious homosexual thoughts, and I just think it's so easily transferred to this situation. So obviously, his wife is pissed about finding out that her husband's been boinking some student at the school he's teaching, and they get divorced. Obviously. So after he loses his job, Applewhite moves to Houston, Texas in 1965 to teach at the University of St. Thomas. How'd they let this happen? I don't know. But his students actually complimented this guy. They said he was an engaging speaker and he dressed very stylishly. And he also got, a lot of local fame being like a choral director for a church choir group. And interestingly, for a short time in Texas, Applewhite was openly gay, which is a bold move being in Texas at the time. But it was weird because he was also pursuing a relationship with this woman though. So it was all very confusing. He's openly admitting that he's gay, specifically gay. It's not like he said that he was bisexual. It's he was very much I am gay, but then he was courting this woman. And of course it didn't turn out well because the girl's parents were like, hey, I don't think this guy, knows what he's fucking doing. So, so Marshall Applewhite becomes a single Pringle once again, and in 1970, he resigns from the University of St. Thomas, claiming that depression and other emotional problems were to blame. Hold on to your fucking hats, because the real reason, sociologists believe, was that he was having another same-sex relationship with a male student. Whoo! Homosexual tendencies 2, being a good teacher 0. So after his second reenactment of a teacher-student porno, Applewhite moved to New Mexico, where he operated a deli, which is a little store that sells meats and cheeses or whatever, and he was actually popular with customers, but he decided to return to Texas later that year because sadly his father passed away around this time, and this of course would take a huge emotional toll on Applewhite, causing severe depression. And over time, his debts just start racking up, which just one thing leads to another, and he would frequently borrow money from his friends. And, he's upset, so it's just a really hard time for Marshall right now. But this is kind of where it all starts. In 1972, Applewhite met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a very weird interest in theosophy and biblical prophecy. And according to Applewhite's writings, the two met in a hospital where she worked while she was visiting a sick friend there. It has been rumored that it was a psychiatric hospital, but people have pointed out that Nettles was only substituting for another nurse, working with premature babies in the nursery. But anyway, back to them. The two just hit it off and become just the best of friends. He later mentions that he felt like he had known her for this really long time. And, when you feel that way about somebody, naturally the conclusion is that you've met in a past life, or at least that's what Applewhite says. He claims that they were friends in a past life, and that's why they were so close. So, but she told him their meeting had been foretold to her by extraterrestrials, persuading him that he had this divine assignment. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Get ready, because it just keeps going further and further. But yes, the alarm bells are ringing. This woman is saying that aliens are telling her that they were destined to meet. But of course, Applewhite buys into this whole thing, and he starts looking into all these alternatives to the traditional Christian doctrine. And it was around this time that he began to have visions. And in one, he claimed that God basically chose him to be the next Jesus. It begins. So the dynamic duo, old Applewhite and Nettles, they start, they're BFFs. So what happens next, right? Well, Applewhite moves in with her. Like, they're just fucking move right in like little college dorm mates. And now I know what you're thinking with your little gutter minds. No, there was nothing sexual about the relationship. In fact, actually, Applewhite had mentioned for a long time that he wanted somebody close with like a deep relationship, but more of like in a platonic way. So it's a completely platonic relationship. And this would have made sense, especially since Nettles was married with 2 kids. So yeah, this of course didn't last long with Applewhite around. The husband's like, look kids, mommy's talking about aliens and spaceships, like we gotta get the fuck out of here. So she gets a divorce, and shortly after, Applewhite cuts off all contact with his family. So now they can like fully dedicate all of their time to each other, and they're just fucking batshit alien shit. So in February of 1973, they decide that they're ready to take their teachings and just spread them all over the place. So perfect time for a road trip. Woo! Yeah! So they start driving around the wild, wild Southwest to teach others about their beliefs, and the trip would later be described as a restless, intense, often confused spiritual journey. And so while traveling, they didn't have a whole lot of money, and they sold their blood for money and lived off these little bread rolls and camped out, and sometimes they didn't pay like their bills at motels and shit. So one of their friends from Houston was like, hey, that wild alien shit you guys have been spitting? It's pretty cool. And she agrees to follow their teachings. So in May 1974, the old Heaven's Gate cult got its humble beginning. All right, fucking strap in, people, because now we're starting to get into all this stuff that old Applewhite and Nettles believed in. So get this, right? These people believed this. So while they're on their little missionary trip, they start, digging a little deeper. Applewhite starts reading these science fiction novels and just really becomes engulfed in the whole like science fiction-y extraterrestrial alien shit, right? So finally they agree on this basic build for their cult. They're like, yo, we were put here on Earth by this ancient race of humans that traveled space, and we're here to like fulfill these biblical prophecies, and because of this, we've got these like advanced minds, and we're enlightened, and it just goes from here. So they start doing things like these like open speeches talking about all this wild stuff. Like these people literally believed that they would be killed, like, or they not killed, Jesus, they would die and then be restored to life and then transported onto a spaceship, holy shit. And they like called this the demonstration. And they also started coming up with all kinds of weird fucking names for themselves. They called themselves like the UFO 2 and just all this crazy shit. And obviously people are like, what the fuck is wrong with them? So their presentations were met with very little support. So get ready, right? So in August 1974, Applewhite was arrested in Harlingen, Texas for failing to return a car that he had rented in Missouri. And he was extradited to St. Louis and jailed for 6 months. At the time, he maintained that he had been divinely authorized to keep the car. Jesus fucking Christ. Can you imagine like a cop goes to arrest you? He knows the car is stolen. He knows that you've like taken the car, and your response is, well, actually, officer, God wants me to have this car, and not just any God, right? Space God. So how about you just, shut the fuck up and move along? Like, Jesus Christ. Anyway, so while Applewhite's in jail, he just starts like thinking all like about his God stuff and basically abandons the discussion of like the occult, right? So he's like, magic, God and all that stuff. It's out of the picture. It's actually all science, and it's, extraterrestrials and evolution and shit. And so, Applewhite spends his time in the slammer, and Nettles and him decide to contact extraterrestrials and, also find like-minded followers. So they start publishing all these advertisements for meetings, and they would recruit disciples who they called their crew, you know, kind of like a spaceship, you know. But at the events, they claimed to be these, like, the speakers of these beings from another planet, or like the next level, as they called it. And, you know, they sought, you know, they claimed that they would agree, you know, that they were going to be part of this next higher evolutionary level. And so these people buy into it. So they've got a cult now. But, you know, what are they going to name this cult? Well, you know, the title says Heaven's Gate, but actually, when they first started this shit, they initially named their organization the Anonymous Sexaholic Celibate Church. But then they renamed it the Human Individual Metamorphosis, which isn't much better. So in 1975, the newly assembled crew meets at this hotel in Waldport, Oregon. And so these crew members are they get ready to join, and they're selling all their worldly possessions, so basically everything they have, and they're saying like their final goodbyes to their loved ones for good. Like what? Like, already fucking weird. But after this, you know, the group vanishes from the public eye, just poof, into thin air. And like that night on the CBS Evening News, Walter Cronkite, who's like this, you know, famous reporter or whatever, said that the group had like disappeared. And he says, like, you know, it was a mystery. Have they been taken on a so-called trip to eternity, or have they simply been taken? So what actually happens is, you know, fucking crackpot crazy. Applewhite and Nettles, you know, they start getting arranged to have everybody go underground, but that, you know, obviously doesn't happen. So Applewhite and Nettles lead this 100-member crew across the country, and they're like sleeping in tents and sleeping bags, and they're begging in the streets, and they're preaching all their stuff about higher evolutionary beings. And Applewhite actually believes that he's directly related to Jesus. So he went from like saying that he was the next Jesus to saying that he was related to Jesus. And here soon he's actually going to believe that he is Jesus, or like the spirit of Jesus is in him. So it's wild. But the crazy doesn't stop there. Applewhite and Nettles are now calling themselves Doe and T, which is something that they were referred to a lot as. So Doe was Applewhite and T was Nettles. But anyway, they taught during their early phases of being like their fucking cult, that Doe, his like bodily vehicle, as they called them, was inhabited by the same alien spirit which belonged to Jesus. And T, you know, Nettles, was basically alien god. Like her body was the vessel for alien god. So I'm telling you, people, it just keeps getting weirder. So they start touring the United States, and they're spouting all this crazy shit that they use, like higher level metamorphosis, and that these false god spirits have been deceiving Americans for too long. And they even said some shit about using meditative sun healing, so just some whackball shit. And, you know, throughout the late 70s and early 80s, the cult grew, gathering, you know, people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds, you know. The majority of them were far left, you know, these truth seekers and these spiritual hippies who've been trying to, like, find themselves or whatever. But the funny thing is that those weren't the only members of the group. Like, in fact, one such recruit was actually a man named John Craig, who was this respected Republican who ran for the Colorado House of Representatives at the time, joining in 1975. So the more you know. So unfortunately, in 1983, Nettles had an eye surgically removed as a result of cancer diagnosed several years earlier, and she lived for 2 more years, but she finally passed away in 1985. And Applewhite told their followers that she had traveled to the next level because she had too much energy to remain on Earth, and abandoning her body to make the journey. So, Jesus. So in the late 1980s, the group had kept this low profile. And Applewhite's group basically remained hidden until 1992, when they made an infamous video series. You see, after Nettles' death, Applewhite wanted to utilize a new form of recruitment, and so he went for a form of advertisement that Nettles never really understood or agreed with, and that's the use of the internet. And so Applewhite published these tapes on the internet. Essentially, what these tapes are is just this recruitment video recorded by Applewhite himself. And he made these videos where he would stare into the camera and proclaim just all this crazy shit that he and Nettles believed. I'll play a clip or two here for you to listen to.
Planet Earth about to be recycled. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us. Planet Earth about to be recycled. Your only chance to survive or evacuate is to leave with us.
So it's definitely weird, and you can clearly hear in his voice that this guy's not fucking right. And if you just see the video, his eyes are just so fucking just big and just wide and full of fucking crazy. And so over the course of this cult's existence, several hundred people joined and left. Like, it's just this constant fluctuation of like people coming in, people leaving. In the early 1990s, Applewhite posted some of his teachings on the internet, but, you know, since it's the internet, and we all know how cruel it can be, he got a lot of backlash from people. And that year, he first started speaking of the possibility of suicide as a way to reach the next level. And he explained that everything human had to be forsaken, including the human body, before one could ascend to the next level. And the organization was then renamed Heaven's Gate. So that's where we get the name we have today. So it's after this point that membership starts to kind of wane, and it gets down to about like 26 members. And with so many people leaving, Applewhite starts to, you know, freak the fuck out. So in May 1993, the group spends $30,000 to publish a full-page advertisement in USA Today that warned of this catastrophic judgment that was going to befall Earth. Like, yikes. $30,000 dollar bills just to tell everybody that the world's coming to an end. Yikes. But I guess it worked, you know, because the advertisement led about 20 or so, you know, former members to rejoin, because I guess they're just like, oh shit, well now they got an advertisement, they're official, you know? So from June to about October of 1995, the group lived in this rural part of New Mexico. They purchased about 40 acres and built this compound, which they referred to as the Earth Ship, using like tires and lumber or whatever. And Applewhite was hoping to establish like a monastery. But of course, you know, this is a difficult endeavor because at this point, Applewhite's, you know, getting old. He's an old, decrepit old dude, and he's, you know, in poor health. And at one point, even mentioned that, you know, he was like, I think I have cancer. And so, you know, also like they're trying to build it in the middle of winter and it's really cold. So they just kind of abandoned the whole thing. And they just live in like these different houses in the San Diego area or whatever. So one major point that I found odd about the group was it's really focused on the suppression of sex and sexual-based desires. And, you know, this is demonstrated because Applewhite and 7 others, you know, went full out, full send, and had themselves, like, surgically castrated. And they initially had difficulty finding, you know, this willing surgeon because, obviously, you know, these dudes are going to come up to you and be like, hey, we want our fucking shit cut. Like, so, it's, like, a very serious thing, you know, you can't just fucking decide you want to be castrated, like, and so, but they finally found a doctor who's gonna do it, and, you know, whatever. In Applewhite's view, sexuality is one of the most powerful forces that bound humans to their bodies and hindered their efforts to evolve to the next level. So saying, like, you know, fucking, this is the thing keeping you from evolving or whatever, and he thought, you know, fucking, he preached the next level being, so like the aliens that you would turn into, I guess. I don't know, because he said, like, he talks about like how in the next level there are like alien bodies waiting for you, and how next level beings didn't have reproductive organs, but that, you know, it's wild. So he also makes like a statement from the New Testament where there would be no marriage in heaven. In addition, he required members to put on similar clothing and haircuts, and, you know, to kind of like reinforce that they were like non-sex or whatever, that they were like almost androgynous, I guess. And so, in all the photos and videos you see of Applewhite and his little crew, they've all got short buzz cuts and these weird ass jumpsuits. It's just really weird. So in October of 1996, the group rented this mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and all the members are living together under one roof. And, you know, they ate together, slept together, just like one big creepy ass jumpsuit wearing family. And this whole time they're still making their videos and shit. And there's one where Applewhite, you know, makes this statement, and I'll let Mr. Applewhite put it in his own words.
Because humans think that this is a flesh body world, and it is. It's a flesh body world. but it's more importantly a human flesh body world. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the evolutionary level above human, is also, they have bodies. I wouldn't say flesh bodies because it's different characteristics, but it's a physical body, and it's equivalent for that evolutionary level to a human body. It doesn't need the kind of fuel that humans would need. It's not a mammalian body. It doesn't reproduce. It's not male nor female. It probably would look like what you might consider a very attractive extraterrestrial.
So just really, really weird stuff. And around the same time, they learned of the approach of the Hale-Bopp comet, which, was a comet that, was happening at that time. And so the gears start turning in old Applewhite's head, and he comes to the conclusion that Nettles is aboard this spaceship that is following the comet's trail, and that she's going to meet with them, like rendezvous or whatever. So he fucking tells all his followers, hey, you know that craft in the comet? Well, this vessel is going to transport us to the next level, and the government doesn't want us to know about it. So, what was the way of climbing aboard this vessel, you ask? How were he and his crew going to be reunited with Nettles in their space utopia? Suicide. That's right. Marshall Applewhite was going to convince his followers to take their own lives along with him. And he stated that his deceased followers would be taken by the vessel, and they would leave this earthly, realm to board the ship. And how he learned of the comet, or why he believed it was accompanied by aliens, or why he should have believed that Nettles was going to be with it, I don't know. Nobody knows. I've looked into it. Nobody knows why. I'm just going to go ahead and guess that his obsession with sci-fi just kind of sort of manifested itself in this ways. Who knows? I'm no expert. So in preparation of this, the group isolates themselves completely, like cutting all contact, and they began recording these really cryptic farewell statements. And I'll give you a small sample here of some of the stuff that people said.
Yeah, for the record, if people want to know why we're choosing to do this, I think this planet has become a very, very hideous place. They take control of you from the cradle to the grave.
And couldn't be happier about what we're about to do.
And those are only like a few, and it's just so weird to me. Like, you can hear that one girl start to like her voice starts to catch, and they just kind of laugh it off to kind of like bring her back into the scheme of it. Like, you can tell that she's like terrified, like, holy shit, I'm actually about to, fucking take my own life with these people. And they just kind of laugh it off to like pull her back in. So it's really sad to like think about that. But anyway, they weren't the only ones. Applewhite also recorded a farewell video, and he, terms the suicides as the final exit of the group, and makes the comment that we do in all honesty hate this world. And Applewhite believed that no one would be around to take his place after he took his life, so there was no reason to leave anyone behind or appoint a new leader. They were all going to go out together. So in the late March of 1997, the group attends this final supper together at a Marie Callender's in Carlsbad, and one of the waitresses claimed that they all ordered the exact same thing. It was all set up before they came in. They had these iced teas to drink, dinner salads beforehand with this tomato vinegar dressing, turkey pot pie for the entree, cheesecake blueberries on top of the dessert. They're going all out. This sounds like a fucking good-ass meal. But they seemed, the waitress said that they seemed really nice, really friendly, and really polite. And no one seemed really depressed or sad at all or anything like that. And the manager even said that they were nice people. Odd, but nice. So after they've had their meal, the crew returns to their estate and they get to work. The suicides began on March 22nd. So 39 members, including Applewhite. And so they're all wearing these black tracksuits with a patch that says Heaven's Gate Away Team and black and white Nike Decade sneakers, right? And the way they killed themselves is they ate applesauce laced with barbiturates and washed it down with vodka. They would then put these bags over their heads so that they would suffocate, after which purple shrouds were placed over their bodies and they were laid down to leave their earthly vehicles behind. Like, they weren't killing themselves, at least in their minds, but they were freeing their souls from their earthly vessels so that they could ascend to their new home in space. And it's tragic. And like a bag was found that contained a few dollars and a form of identification, and they were placed beside most of the bodies. But the weird thing is the deaths occurred over 3 days. Applewhite was one of the last to die, but not the last. So they didn't all kill themselves at once. 3 assistants helped Applewhite die by suicide and then killed themselves. And so it's just fucking, so imagine being in the house, being one of the last groups to kill yourselves, and you're surrounded by just all these fucking dead people in the same clothes with purple shrouds over them. That had to have been so cryptic and morbid. And the only reason that they found it so quickly is because there was an anonymous tip that was left by someone, and this led the sheriff's department to search the mansion, and they found the 39 bodies on March 26, and it became the largest group suicide involving U.S. citizens since the mass suicide of the Americans in Jonestown, which I will cover in a later episode. You better believe. I'm just trying to mentally prepare myself for it, because that's a rough one. But Applewhite's body was found seated on the bed of the mansion's master bedroom. So, they all killed themselves. So the deaths of the Heaven's Gate away team provoked this huge media uproar, right? People were shocked and appalled that people could believe and follow such a wild belief system and then, take their own lives to ascend to the stars. It was wild at the time. And the comet really didn't help, and a lot of astrologists said that they expected odd behavior when the comet, was going to happen, but nothing this bad. And sure enough, Applewhite's wild-eyed face was plastered on the cover of magazines, newspapers, and television sets, and his final message was being broadcasted all over, which is awful because, the media coverage isn't the only result of this. News of the Heaven's Gate ascension motivated a copycat suicide. There was a 58-year-old man living near Marysville, California, who killed himself in a similar fashion. And he left a note dated March 27th, which said, "I'm going on the spaceship with Hale-Bopp to be with those who have gone before me." And so the man was found dead by a friend on March 31st. So, obviously that's not a coincidence. He 100% was copying the Heaven's Gate people. It's just fucked up. Another after effect of the whole thing is that the shoes, the black and white Nike Decade sneakers that everybody was wearing, were discontinued by Nike for very obvious and macabre reasons. However, a pair that were found in the storage closet after everything happened became something of a collector's item, and they actually ended up going on eBay for $6,660. See what they did there? But by far the creepiest thing about the Heaven's Gate cult is that to this day, their website is still up. You can clearly see the entire website online right now by just looking up Heaven's Gate. All of their old beliefs are still up, there for everybody to see. And one of the statements that can be seen at the top of the screen reads, "By the time you read this, we suspect that the human bodies we were wearing have been found and that a flurry of fragmented reports have begun to hit the wire services. For those who want to know the facts, the following statement has been issued." And then it goes into the act itself and all the shit the press has released about it. But all this info, all the stuff that this cult believed is right here on the internet. Wild. So in conclusion, 39 people, 40 if you count the old man who was inspired, took their own lives by following Marshall Applewhite. And it's just wild to me. The cults have always interested me. Like I said in the Om Shinrikyo episode, it's just weird to think that these cult leaders are so good at manipulating people and making them see things their way. It just blows my mind. But unlike a lot of cults, this wasn't some scheme. It wasn't some plot to collect their money. Marshall Applewhite, wasn't a con man. He believed everything he was preaching. He believed that God was an alien and that humans were simply using these physical vessels before they were released to the higher evolutionary state. And he took 39 people with him, all of them willing to take their own lives in the hope that their souls would rest in their heaven amongst the stars. Alright, well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode, guys, and thanks for being patient with me. Honestly, this episode was so hard for me to write. I don't know why either. I enjoyed this topic. It's not that I'm getting bored with the podcast or, I didn't like the subject matter, because if that was the case, I would have just changed it, but I don't know what it was, but just this whole process, I just had such a hard time writing this fucking thing. It just really, really fucked me up, but, I got it out, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks again for bearing with me. And on another note, I know in my last episode I mentioned that I would be appearing on a certain podcast, which I regret to inform I was a bit hasty in naming it, so if you've been searching and just couldn't find it, like, don't feel crazy. The name of the podcast that I guest starred on is the What the Niche podcast, which you can find by typing it into Google. I will have a link to his page in the description of this video. Go check it out. Andrew, great guy. We had a really engaging conversation, and his podcast is just super interesting and it's super organic. So if you like, listen to podcasts where like it's not just one fucking loser talking about ghosts and shit, you actually like to hear like two people talk about like really fascinating topics, definitely go check him out. Like I said, there will be a link in the description, or just type in What the Niche podcast. Really interesting stuff. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Thanks again for listening, and as always, stay weird, everybody.